All right, everybody. So it's just afternoon, and we have a lot of great topics we want to cover. So let's kick off this information session this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from around the country. We are thrilled that we have such a great crowd for this. My name is Asha Scielzo. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as well as the panel in a minute. But first, I'm really honored to introduce Dean Wendy Perdue, who is the Dean of the University of Richmond School of Law, who'll share a minute or two of welcome with us. Thank you, Dean Perdue, for being here.
Thank you. And welcome to everyone. We're delighted to have you participating in this program. All of our schools, at all of the schools, adjunct faculty are a really critical part of the educational infrastructure. All of us are at schools that care deeply about really preparing our students for practice, for instilling a sense of professional identity, of helping our students be 100% ready to enter the profession. And our adjunct faculty are a critical part of that. You bring your substantive expertise, but also your experiences as practicing lawyers, and it makes a huge difference. So we're thrilled to have this group of people who are interested in learning more about the process of becoming an adjunct and giving thought to stepping into that role and having an impact at your alma mater or at the school near where you are living these days. I did want to have a short shout out to my colleague, Associate Dean Allison Tait, who was our cheerleader and organizer for all of this, and had the foresight to reach out to the other schools so that we could make it an even more comprehensive program. So I hope it's a great program for you. And again, thank you for your interest in it.
Thank you so much, Dean Perdue. Well, as I mentioned, we have a lot of great topics we want to cover, and I just want to give a little bit of the background and the purpose of the program. So all of us actually that are speaking today only connected through this event, and we're thrilled to do that, and we hope to maintain that connection. But the reason we did that is because many of us have been approached with questions about, how do I get into law school teaching? I'd love to do that. Myself, I teach as an adjunct. I do have a full-time role at American University Washington College of Law to direct our health law and policy program, but my teaching has always been as an adjunct. And even before this full-time role, I started out in teaching back in 2010 as an adjunct at AU and many other law schools. For me, my area was health law, but today we're going to talk about every different area of law, and we welcome everybody's different interests and expertise to come to this discussion. But one thing I invariably have been hearing for years and years, as all of us have, is, how do I get into it? And I think that's the genesis for this program that we realized, Allison and I early on, and then bringing others in to say, how do people get into it? And no process is alike at every school. There's nothing that's exactly going to be identical, but there are certainly themes and ways in which we can hopefully help you better understand this process and how to potentially get involved. And the value that we all find in teaching, as well as our adjunct professionals, is so important. So we also want this program to be a way to open a door to more conversations. So just keep in mind that we are here for each of you as a resource in our particular environments, but we can make other connections for you. We can maybe direct you to a law school that might be more convenient for you, where you have a connection that you'd like to build. And we are also hoping to do more programming. So one thing that you will find after this session, which is being recorded, that the recording will be shared with everyone who registered. And we'll also share some informal feedback opportunities, because we'd love to hear from you how we can continue to add information that will be helpful to you in this journey. So with that, I will also mention our Q&A box. That is the way to post questions. I will be monitoring it. We all will be doing that. We're going to keep this informal. If we see a question that we can tackle as we go, we will. If we have some time at the end, we'll do our best. But again, we invite you to reach out to each of us through LinkedIn or email to further that conversation. So with that, I want to thank our panelists who've just come together and did the preparation and really put a lot of thought into having this session for all of us today. I have joining me today Michelle Drumbl, who's the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the Washington and Lee University School of Law. I'm also joined by Deborah Eisenberg, who's the Vice Dean at University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law. We also have Giuffrida, who's the Assistant Dean for Academic and Faculty Affairs at William & Mary Law School. We're joined by Sonali Gunawardhana, who's an adjunct professor at American University, Washington College of Law, and Allison Tait, who's the Associate Dean of Faculty at the University of Richmond School of Law. So we've tried to bring a sort of a broad array of folks here. It may feel a little bit regional because of DC, Virginia, but the ideas that we're going to share are absolutely going to be consistent and true nationally. So with that, let me ask our panelists to kick us off with just the first question that I often hear, but also myself have thought about as an adjunct approaching a law school and thinking about how I might be able to contribute my expertise. And that is, what kind of content is really going to be relevant to a law school? What kind of topics? I myself mentioned my health law background, but we all know in practice, many of us can get really into the weeds and we have a lot of expertise. And sometimes that can be very narrow. In other cases, it's more broad. How do we think about the content that's going to really be relevant in a law school atmosphere, law school community, such that you all in your decision-making positions would think about bringing on an adjunct? And so I'll just ask anyone to jump in with that first. Maybe Allison, if you wanted to start us off. Oh, you're muted.
Didn't even mean to raise my hand, but there we go.
Well, you get to go first.
Yeah, I think one of the nice things about adjunct teaching is there's sort of two ways of thinking about it in terms of curricular needs. And you might think about it in terms of what a school needs when they just need to replace somebody who already teaches a particular class for a semester or a year or something like that. So where you could fill in, but also where they might be needing to teach classes that aren't covered by the faculty that they have. So it might be, places where there are gaps in the curriculum, places where it might make more sense for an adjunct to teach something that's particularly practice-based and that's really oriented toward getting our students ready to practice. And then there's also sort of the new fields that are coming up, just thinking of things about law and technology or, areas where there might be people out there doing work that, expertise is really developing sort of as we speak, right? Where there might be a real opportunity to bring people in. So there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but when you're thinking about what you might be interested in teaching, would it be something that, where would it fit in? Would it be something that maybe somebody already teaches? Could it be a new course that you could add, would it be something that would be like, a real practitioner specialty, or would it be maybe an emerging topic? I think those are maybe ways to break it down initially.
Absolutely. And it sounds very personal to the law school that you're thinking to approach. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? Just jump in. I think that's the best way. Yeah.
Thank you. I completely agree with Allison. This is the nicest way to sort of divide these two groups. I would also add what you really like. Students pick up on passion, and you're likely to shape their future careers. So there are 2 or 3 alums who have changed their career path because they took a 2 credit course with an adjunct, have realized an entire new industry that they were not aware of, and this is how they build their career. So being very interested and passionate about what you do is significantly important, especially for me, and I guess my colleagues, when we're sort of vetting the various candidates. It's one of the things that I take into account.
Just add from Maryland Carey Law's perspective that generally, and I think this is true at all law schools, that the core doctrinal subject matters are typically covered every year by full-time faculty, right? So civil procedure, contracts, torts, maybe there's a one-off from year to year, but under ABA, American Bar Association guidelines, our full-time faculty are covering those. So adjuncts are very helpful in specialty areas. So working just like Asha does with health law at her law school, we have quite a few adjuncts who are connected with the full-time faculty in our particular specialty areas. I think law schools nationwide are always looking for excellent adjuncts and to help teach legal writing, especially in spring semesters when it's persuasive writing. So there are ways to get involved there. And then just generally other types of specialty topics where adjuncts are practicing in that area. Sports law is very hot, entertainment law, things like that. as well as intellectual property, just across the board, business types of topics. And so I think for most law schools looking for adjuncts to sort of round out the curriculum in those practice-based specialties is very important and very helpful. Our students absolutely love their adjunct professors.
Well, and I'll just jump in before anyone else wants to join. I've definitely heard that quite frequently, that the legal research and writing curriculum is often very, very eager to have adjuncts teaching. And it's such an important role that you play working with 1Ls to build those core skills. And it also helps you build those teaching skills and get to a little bit know the law school a little bit better. And sometimes can be a nice entry point. You're building those skills, and then you maybe get to understand the faculty and the team that's already in place at that law school. And then therefore, what are the needs? What might be the gaps? So it's a really great point there. Any other thoughts about subject matter or content? Okay, well, we may circle back to some of these topics as we go, but let me just ask all of you to think about helping us understand what are the preliminary considerations. So we have a great group here, just a really great crowd. It just shows you that there's a lot of interest in the industry to bring that law school practice to the classroom. And so what should everyone on this meeting be thinking about first? So, kind of as they're starting to gear up, we talked a little bit about the content, but what are some of those other preliminary considerations?
I'm happy to jump in from an adjunct perspective. So I serve as an adjunct. I love doing it. I think you really have to have a passion for teaching. I think you also need to be aware of the time commitment, and that if you have a full-time regular job, that you would probably have to ask your employer for permission to teach. You would also have to try to work it into your schedule. So the nice thing is law schools are very flexible sometimes with adjunct taught courses, and they allow you to teach in the evenings. So I think you really need to think about the time commitment, and that once a student is a student, they're always going to ask you for other things outside of the classroom. So just keep that in mind. So if it is something that you're really passionate about, a subject, I think if it is a hot area and an area where there's a lot of shakeup or a lot of movement, I think there is a desire for law schools to offer that practical approach to their students who might be interested in actually pursuing a career in that area.
That makes sense, that permission of the employer to start. And I've definitely felt that sometimes government folks who are working in different parts of government have had a little bit more of a process for getting that permission. And sometimes it can actually take several months. So just something else to keep in mind for all of us, that getting that permission at the outset, just clear that path so that you're not doing a lot of this diligence and work, and then you have to sort of circle back and realize there could be some constraints. Other thoughts on preliminary considerations?
I might just add about timing, that it's kind of never too early to start the conversations. It's very possible and very likely, if you get started, we can talk about who to talk to and, what type of things to, ask. We can talk about that too. But the earlier you start the conversations, even if, the next semester it doesn't work out, you put yourself on that school's radar and the radar of the associate dean who might be, looking to fill classes. And that person knows that you're out there because, there's sort of different stages of sort of curricular planning and semester planning. And so being in conversation with the school about what their needs are, when they might need it. And again, so even if it's just something, you don't have a full-fledged package of something you want to bring to the table, just starting the conversation early, I think, is helpful.
I would echo that. Most schools plan their curriculum at least a year out, and the curriculum tends to have a sequencing to it. And so knowing that there are adjuncts and judges and attorneys who are interested in teaching at some point really helps as we're thinking of planning the curriculum year to year, and knowing that you're out there and you're interested. And it's more likely that we would start an adjunct in an established course where, say, an adjunct has been teaching for a long time and is retiring, or we need coverage because a faculty member is visiting away, for example, rather than a whole new course. So I would say, sending I know we're going to talk about how to apply, but you do not need to reach out with a full course in your mind. I think reaching out to share, these are my areas of expertise. I like to dip a toe. I'm interested in teaching. That is a good place to start. Rather than sort of sending a whole plan for a new course. That's unlikely to be successful just because we plan our curriculum so far in advance. We want to get to know you. We want to get to know what you're like in the classroom before considering developing new courses.
And we'll talk a little bit more a little bit later in the hour about those materials, but let's just to make sure we fully discuss the timing point. And I think you raise a really excellent point of a year is not often what I think an adjunct or practitioner thinks about. They might think, well, I'd love to teach in the spring, and I just think it's really important for us to emphasize that, how far we do our planning in terms of the curriculum. And yes, there can be sometimes a last minute need, something doesn't go as planned. Somebody who had committed has to make a change. But generally speaking, getting on the radar screen, and we're going to help talk about how to do that and what materials to send when you do that, is wise. Even if you're just saying, even if that person says, I don't have a need now, it's not a wasted effort because you're in a file or you're in a place where then that person can refer back to you. And I do that personally. I know all the time, and I know many of you as well. And to not be sort of discouraged by that timing piece, that it may not line up exactly when you thought, or it might not happen, next semester. But the idea is we just have to plan it so far out in terms of how we think about our curriculum, enrollment, all these different things that we'll get into a little bit more. So just before we move into that, some more preliminary considerations. I think we need to put it out there about compensation, or Ria, if you wanted to add something else on the timing point.
I wanted, if you don't mind, I wanted to give a slightly different perspective from that of Dean Eisenberg, because just to add to the fact that different schools may operate slightly differently. From William and Mary's perspective, in my experience, which again is not extensive, it's just sort of my second year in this position, I have seen actually more new courses taught by adjunct faculty rather than having adjunct faculty teaching established courses. It may well be because, as Vice Dean Eisenberg was mentioning, you need to have a need, right? For in this moment, perhaps we haven't had faculty rotating out of courses, so that's not been an immediate requirement. But I've had a number of smaller courses that we have created for adjunct. So to balance out the fact that some of you may be new to the world of instructing, and so you need to find your feet in teaching a classroom of very talented and sometimes very opinionated law students. Teaching a course that we call the mini courses. I suspect every university will have their own denomination, but they are 1 credit courses. So there always is a time commitment, as Sonali mentioned. It doesn't tend to be quite as much, of course, as if you're teaching a 3 credit course. So in the approach, as you reach out to universities, you may also want to raise up the idea that you would be open, if you are, to creating a new small course. I tend to help the adjunct faculty to even come up with an idea. I'm very excited when people come up with a fully baked idea, but that's not necessary. Asha, I'm sorry, I sort of jumped in.
I would love to explore that a little bit, and we can go a little bit out of order because you talked about a new course versus an established course. And again, this is something, I'd love to be able to say at every school, and all of us are going to have slightly different experiences here to share, which I think is part of the takeaway here, that you have to kind of approach one school and think what's going to work there. But some of us are thinking we've got an established course, we want to keep it, it's in our rotation, students are expecting it, it works well. It's popular, but the adjunct or the full-time faculty member is not available for whatever reason. So that's when you might have that need. And it might be more emergent that, I didn't realize that I need it, or I know a sabbatical is coming up, or an adjunct is going to be on maternity leave or another paternity leave or something like that. However, there's sometimes, like you said, Aria, that there's so much wonderful content. The law is so dynamic and complex and ever-changing. And there could be this interest of saying, wouldn't it be great to bring on this new course? 1, 2 credit, as it may be. We know we brought in a digital health in the law course 7 or 8 years ago, and it was, great. Or during COVID, a vaccines in the law course that actually Sonali taught. And so law schools want to be entrepreneurial, and they want to really react to the market. So I really appreciate your point. Other thoughts about that, about how those on this call should be thinking about a new course versus an established course, and how they might want to be flexible about that in their approach?
I'm happy to chime in on that as well. And again, all the caveats that all law schools are different and differently situated. We're in a very rural part of Virginia, and as opposed to in the DC area. But from my perspective, I like to hear from people who are interested in teaching as an adjunct, whether they've done it somewhere else or not. Some reach out with a course that's sort of ready to go where they've taught elsewhere, and others just want to let me know that they're interested. And so what I like to do is just get a sense of their expertise and experience in teaching if there is any. But I have the same experience that I'm a bit flexible. Sometimes I know there's this course that we really need every year, and I want to have that covered. But there have been sort of curricular gaps that I have identified in part through these sort of long-term conversations. And it's true that in some of these cases, like I'll talk to an adjunct off and on, or a potential adjunct off and on, for a year before it develops into something concrete that we might put on the schedule. Other times it is a quicker turnaround than that. So I think it's most important is just knowing of interest. And then I'm sure others use a similar approach, an email folder that's dedicated to these inquiries. And I like to keep that. And I often will reply and just say, thanks for your interest. Right now our curricular needs are covered in that area. But I'll contact you if anything changes. And sometimes it does change, and it might be months or a year or longer. But just to let those who are interested know that those contacts are helpful, and that we do actually circle back to them over time. And we love to hear from people.
Other thoughts on this before we talk about compensation? Okay, well, that's another preliminary consideration that we really felt would be important to raise and be transparent about. Anyone want to chime in a little bit about how folks should be thinking about that in terms of the time they're putting in and the compensation they can expect?
Well, I'm happy to chime in as an adjunct. Compensation is different at every school, and it's also different based on how many credits you're teaching. I will say that it is, it's not going to be like winning the lottery by any means, but it's what you get out of it. I don't think that you can expect adjunct teaching to be along the same lines as a full-time career somewhere else, or even the pay to be anywhere similar to it. I think it's more that you have a desire to share your knowledge and to kind of give back to, the next generation of lawyers. And the compensation is something nice that you get for doing the work, but it's not going to be the compensation that takes care of all your bills by any means. But it is nice that you still get compensated, and I think that is one part of it that you should look at. But I also think that adjuncts really, most of the adjuncts that I know, they do it because they have a love for teaching. So just keep that in mind if you're really interested.
Yeah, I'll just add that the adjunct stipend tends to be a per credit amount, based on the number of credits that the stipend would increase. And I would say for those of you who, have full-time jobs, or maybe you've, thinking about retiring and you want to have sort of a class that you're teaching, that's really what adjunct teaching is designed to do. It is not a gateway to full-time teaching. If folks are interested in sort of transitioning from practice to teaching, there are different full-time fellowships, academic fellowships that prepare people for academia. So different law schools have those. We have one in our lawyering program. But adjunct teaching really is designed to connect sort of leaders in the profession, lawyers, judges, others, to teaching in the law school. So a lot of law schools rely on their alumni for that, and people in their surrounding legal communities. But as Sonali said, this is not you don't look and approach adjunct teaching if it is a way that you want to sort of replace a full-time salary. It's just not set up revenue rise to be that. And I had another thought, but I'll circle back to it and let others share at this point.
And just put a PS at what Dean Eisenberg has just mentioned. So if there are participants in this webinar who are interested in making that full-time shift, there is an association, it's called the Association of American Law Schools, that has a wealth of resources on their website to really help potential new full-time faculty think about how to make their entire career change. So I sometimes, in the conversations that I have with adjuncts, I have sort of to disappoint them to explain that this is not a way into a full-time job in our institutions. And I see a lot of heads nodding. So we don't want to disappoint you, especially when not sorry, two negatives. We do appreciate your contribution. It's just that this industry works this way. And so if you are interested in a full-time career, perhaps we'll have a different conversation at some point in the near future.
I was just going to say that's a whole nother different webinar. We'd be happy to have that webinar because I think it's an important one, but it really is a whole different track. It's a whole different set of needs. It's a whole different process, but it's an important one for us to be talking about and having transparency around and building pools for both adjunct teaching and full-time teaching. So I know we're going to send out a little survey after, and if this is one of the topics that people are interested in, we would be happy to have that conversation too, because it's another full-time, full-hour conversation. I'll just say that.
That's a wonderful distinction that we're making here, because I think ultimately law schools are very much eager to enrich the diversity of the pipeline of teachers, adjunct or on this more full-time track, but they are distinguishing tracks and processes. And so we're focused here on the adjunct piece, and that it is not a sort of a stepping stone, if you will, to that type of a full-time position. So we've touched a little bit on compensation, and I will mention as well that that sometimes law schools have a union as well around their adjuncts. So just something to, again, each school that you approach to ask these questions. If the compensation is important, I would ask that question early on in the conversations to make sure you feel that you're getting that value in terms of monetarily beyond the value you get from teaching and the wonderful mentoring that you're doing. But it isn't a lot of compensation. Let me just be frank about that. From my perspective, having been an adjunct in a couple different law schools. I will also note that there was a question in the Q&A about travel. And I will ask the panelists to speak to this. Generally speaking, I've seen that we will try to find adjuncts who are local and who can commute locally, since there is still a strong desire to have in-person teaching. We'll talk a little bit about remote in a bit, but and that there wouldn't be, reimbursement for that local travel or out-of-town travel, but there may be exceptions to that. And I'd definitely be curious to hear if the panelists want to talk a little bit about expenses or reimbursement beyond that compensation stipend for the adjunct.
I'll say at Maryland, we do, we're in Baltimore City, we do subsidized parking for our adjunct faculty. Usually adjuncts are teaching in the evening, so parking is also free on the street, but we will, pay for a garage right across the street from the law school as well. Generally, the adjuncts are local. They're because they're within commuting distance. We're not necessarily paying adjuncts to to travel to the law school. I think the one exception to that might be some of these, 1 credit intensive are boot camps. So, for example, we have an alum who is a vice chancellor on the Delaware Court of Chancery. So, we are paying him to come and stay for a week while he teaches this 1 credit intensive in the January corporate litigation boot camp. So in those kinds of situations where you're coming to a school to teach something on a concentrated basis, that there may be ways to negotiate what is it going to take to make it work so that you can teach without going back and forth. I would say some state law schools in particular, Maryland is one of these law schools, we do have restrictions on the states in which our employees can live. And so it has to be a surrounding state. And so that that puts limitations on us, even for our remote Masters of Science in Law, right? You can think about teaching both in the JD program and master's programs that might be more remote in nature, but there may be HR restrictions on the law school in terms of where adjuncts can live. And so that has been something we've been working through. We're trying to figure out a workaround so that we can, in those remote classes, hire experts from all around the world. But as of now, we can't hire someone, say, from New York to be an adjunct, even if remote, even if you're commuting down here. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that the law school, especially a state law school, might have other HR restrictions.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit. We've touched on it about the time commitment, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 credit hours, because preliminarily, I really want the audience to understand the level of time that is really needed to really prepare a course, whether it's a brand new one, or even if you're stepping into the shoes of an existing course, the updates and the familiarity that you will need to get ready for that, the course materials, reading, etc., assessments, grading. What are people's thoughts about that time commitment, 1, 2, 3 credit classes in terms of that, and also the timing and the semester flow? Sometimes I think practitioners, we don't always understand that cadence of 13 or 14 weeks and the way the assessments work. So if anyone can chime in on that, again, just so we understand preliminarily what we're getting into here.
Happy to chime in. So I think there is a little bit of a difference if you're coming up with the syllabus on your own, or if you are maybe using a template from a previous professor who's taught it in the past. It is, I would say, a significant time commitment, because you're really going to want to make that course your own. And so, there's hours that you teach the course, but there's also hours outside of the classroom that you're going to dedicate to planning and, developing each lecture, or, how the class is going to participate each time you meet. So I do think that there is a significant amount of time that you may put in before the class even begins. And then throughout the course, because, sometimes new cases pop up, things are decided, and you're going to have to shift a little bit, and you're going to probably have to rework certain things. You also have to think about midterms and finals, and, really making sure that you get those grades in at the right time. I think for those of you who like to vacation often, teaching might put a little bit of a dent in your desire to travel spontaneously, because you have classes that you have to prepare for. So I do think that there's a significant amount of time that you are going to dedicate prior to a class starting, and then throughout the course. And even if you're adopting a course that someone else taught, you're just definitely going to have to make updates. So I think it's, using PowerPoint presentations from another professor, just like any other presentation, is sometimes difficult when it's not yours. So going through and making sure that you actually have the time to dedicate, because, all of these students are relying on you as their professor to teach them the material and to be competent. And I think everyone who teaches wants all of their students to be a good reflection of them when they leave the classroom. So, I do think it's a significant amount of time. And, sometimes you think a 1 credit course isn't going to take as much time as a 3 credit course, but I can tell you I've taught both, and they are both similar in the amount of time that you would need to prepare for the course. Where I think it's a little bit different is the amount of time you actually spend teaching the course. But I do want people who are interested in adjunct teaching to recognize that, there's only so much time that you have. And so teaching sometimes might take time away from your families or your friends, and you're going to have to make some decisions as to how you're going to balance that.
Yes, I think that's a really important takeaway, especially when we were having the compensation conversation, that there really has to be this passion and this joy of being with students and being in the classroom. You're commuting every week, potentially, if it's not an immersion kind of class, 13 or 14 weeks, evenings potentially, whatever your schedule may end up being that you select, and the grading, wanting to be there for students, office hours that you might create on your schedule, so it's the time often feels heavy, and the compensation maybe not is lighter. And so you have to kind of understand and strike that balance. And I think speaking to adjuncts, not only on this call, but maybe others that or you meet, and ask them to be quite honest, with you about how they feel that balance is, and if they're getting that value out of it for themselves, or their goals are being met as you think about yours. So let me open up a big question here and ask maybe everyone to sort of chime in, because it's coming into the chat, Q&A, as well as we've thought about it as well. Remote teaching, maybe you're out of town, international, domestic, you're local, but you still prefer to do online because of convenience and schedule. Hybrid opportunities where there's maybe async or some in person. What are the restrictions? What are the considerations, so that when people approach the law school, they kind of know how to think about the online environment?
I'll just say it, quite honestly, like, we don't do a lot of remote anymore. Once sort of first days of the pandemic died down, we really have gone back to in person and fully in person. So we really don't do a lot of remote teaching. For anything, we try fully to be in person. So it's a hard thing to propose, at least on our end. So it would generally be in person. And then this kind of goes back to things we were talking about earlier. We also generally recruit locally for adjuncts. So it's not, it's not hopefully too much of a hardship to do things remotely, or in person as opposed to remotely. But we definitely have a strong preference for in person. I also just wanted to say something back on the point about how much time. And I think people always underestimate, I underestimate how much time it's going to take to prepare for a class, and how much time teaching takes. And, students want to talk to you, and you got to, there's a sort of like push and pull between wanting to give more assessments because it's better for the students to know how they're doing over time versus, then you have to grade them as opposed to having one exam at the end. So there's a lot to think about. But just in terms of that, I think part of the conversation when you're talking with the school and with the associate dean is asking, what kind of things are available, right? Are there, again, has somebody taught something like it? Or even, if it's not the same class, like, can I see some syllabi or some books, or getting help from people in that way? So I just wanted to go back to that. But yeah, in terms of remote, I would say we don't do much remote anymore.
So just to follow on what Allison said, we're very much in the same boat. We're attached to a part of a liberal arts college in our university. So our ethos is very much in person. We're not looking to add any remote offerings. But again, every school is different. And I know that there are schools that have distance education options for different types of courses, whether those are JD or LLM. We don't have an LLM program. And so I think, excuse me, it's really important just to be transparent about that upfront when you're contacting a law school, and just to say, I would only be available remote. And is that a possibility? Because at least in my case, I would it'd be easy for me to save time in our conversation, and to maybe even direct you elsewhere or have some suggestions, rather than have someone ask me about that after they've already put time and effort into teaching a class. So just to add that.
To add to the William and Mary perspective, we also have a strong preference for in-person, but do offer a very few selection of courses exclusively online, or Asha, as you mentioned, so in a hybrid mode where maybe the first and the last session are in person to bookend the course, and other sessions are offered only remotely. I need to add that the reason why every law school is very cautious is because state boards will define how many credits students who want to take the bar exam in that jurisdiction can actually have taken. So it's not just that we have a strong preference, which is, sounds like unanimous across the universities represented, but also we don't want to accidentally put students in a position where the credits that they have taken will not count towards their minimum requirements to take the bar exam. So we offer some, very few, and it's a shame because I appreciate that there is a wealth of expertise across the nation and perhaps internationally, but we have to balance the risk that we put students in terms of sort of building their careers.
Say if you're interested in teaching online, to reach out to law schools that either have evening programs. Sometimes those are more sort of hybrid and have more online opportunities to help part-time students with managing the the number of days they have to commute to campus. So that is one thing to check out. Also in the summer, sometimes, I know in our summer program, we have some in-person and some online classes so that students who have summer jobs, if they also want to, take an evidence class, for example, or get some extra skills, there are a limited number of online classes in the summer. And then some law schools also have master's programs, Masters of Science and Law programs. And increasingly, those are online, either synchronous, meaning live, or asynchronous, meaning not live. They're pre-recorded. And typically those law schools have, centers for teaching and learning, for example, who help the adjunct faculty or whoever's teaching in it design the class, record the class, manage the Blackboard learning management system and things like that. So I think you're more likely to find the online opportunities in those master's programs rather than the JD programs.
Yeah. I just wanted to
Awesome.
mention, Carl put this in the chat. I think it's important. People have used Zoom for bringing in speakers, and I think that's still a possibility. That's still something that is a beautiful thing that Zoom can do for us, right? Bringing in people to be guest speakers and bringing people in to be a part of the class, in that capacity. So that's still available if that's something, that you want to do as part of your class, just not the whole class remotely.
Well, and this is an excellent point because every school, as you can tell, has a different sort of ability to bring in remote teaching, hybrid or fully remote. At AU, for example, we have what we call our weekend immersion courses that are fall, spring, summer, but they're 1 credit. But it's a chance, we almost all, I think, are adjuncts because it's a chance to do it on a weekend, which students like, adjuncts liked, and it's also can be fully virtual. But as folks have said, there are restrictions about where people can be living when they teach, how many students can take, et cetera. So I think, again, part of the lesson or takeaway here is it depends on the school, and getting to have your contact at your school help you work through that and understand that, I think will make your application, which we're going to talk about, or your approach more successful, but it'll also hopefully minimize some of your frustration that as practitioners, we feel they say, well, I don't know why I can't just teach and do that. Why, and understanding these restrictions, I think is important. I will just quickly ask one question that's been percolating through the Q&A, and I'll sort of lump a few of them together. Is there a strong preference for an adjunct who approaches you, who's had some kind of teaching certification? Is there a preference for alumni? Is there a preference because somebody's very prestigious or prominent in their field? How do you guys think about that when you're approached by a practitioner as you are kind of considering their materials?
Well, that's a great question. I think prior experience certainly helps. Teaching is hard. Experts, our adjunct faculty are experts in their fields. And when you get into the classroom, you realize this is different from a continuing legal education type of seminar where you are speaking to people who are already lawyers. It's sometimes difficult to think back to when we knew nothing and we were baby lawyers or not even lawyers yet. And there's something different about the way you teach in a law school environment versus in a professional environment. So prior teaching experience certainly helps. But I think, when I'm interviewing adjuncts, just trying to get a sense of, how passionate are they about working with students? Do they have transferable examples of when they've been mentors? Do they have the time to really put into developing the course? And I think this is where, getting into adjunct teaching, it's much easier to teach something that is already part of the established curriculum, because then you can get prior syllabi, you can work with the academic dean as well as faculty who have taught that course before to get tips about how to do it. And our faculty are very generous in sharing materials that can help make the preparation faster because it is a very difficult thing to do. And I think certainly we love our alumni, but we're not only hiring alumni as adjuncts. I think alumni have that passion for the school, so they're more likely to want to put in the hours and sort of share what they've learned with with future graduates of the school. But all of that matters, right? Your prior teaching experience, how connected are you to the school, your certainly your reputation in the field. But we really are looking for good teachers, because I have had just amazing lawyers teach particular courses. And it hasn't gone well, right? Because, teaching doesn't mean just bringing in guest speakers and, parroting your expertise. It really is hard work. And so I would say that is maybe less of a consideration than, do you have the passion and do you have the right mindset going into teaching, so that it's a pleasurable experience for both you and the students.
And I know some folks in the audience are saying, well, I'm trying to teach and you're saying I have to have teaching experience, and how do I get that first teaching experience? And so that's where coming back to the Zoom guest lecturing, in-person guest lecturing can be really vital, where you really put yourself out there and say, look, I'm available to be a guest lecturer. Takes time to prepare that lecture, takes time to prepare those materials. Maybe you mentor a student because of that guest lecture. And that's how you start to build a little bit of those credentials without having taught a full course or having a special teaching certificate or a special LLM or something like that, which I don't think are required. And I do think that also sometimes you can be a coach. There are often competition teams. There's other ways in which you can sort of be a volunteer judge for a moot court. There's lots of opportunities at the law school that they're looking for practitioners to come into the community. And I do think that can really add to those materials. Speaking of which, I want to make sure we get to it because it's a really important question on everyone's mind. What materials, how do we begin the approach? Who do we first of all approach, right? Within a law school, how do we find the right person? And what should we send in that outreach?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think you'll get to the right person if you reach out to someone. Generally, I would say the most common point of entry is the associate dean for academic affairs, and that's why many of us are on this call together. But I have had people reach out to colleagues or to the dean, and my colleagues or the dean just forward it to me and direct the inquiry to me. And in terms of first information, I find it really helpful to have either a current CV or resume, or just a link to a firm bio or other type of bio, just so that I can right away get a sense of somebody's area of expertise. So that's a really good entry point from my perspective.
I would just say same. Yep. Find an associate dean, look for associate deans, look for either associate dean of faculty or associate dean of academic affairs, one of the two. If you send it to one and you've got the wrong one, they'll send it to the other one. And I would attach a CV and a link to your bio so people can see. I think that's just a great starting point. And, then, in your email, maybe I'm interested in these areas. I'm interested in teaching these possible classes.
And what I would add is sometimes I've had current adjunct faculty who have introduced me to new practitioners who were interested in teaching. So you can also reach out to that population, and they're generally very, very happy to help you navigate the process of reaching the right person, if nothing else. I wanted to add a point, Asha, about what adjuncts can reflect on as they apply for a position. You're also an important point in the network of students finding their first job. So as you think about your experience, your previous teaching exposure, or in different forms, as Asha mentioned, doesn't have to be higher ed experience. Also mention the network that you have, because mentoring one or even just a single student and helping them secure that one interview or potentially secure the job is really valuable for both the student's experience and is valuable for us as well. So be aware that you add value in different perspectives also outside the classroom, and it's something that we genuinely consider as a plus when we interview adjuncts.
And so it sounds like a resume, cover letter. Would a letter of recommendation be helpful or necessary? In that cover letter, I know you just mentioned, for example, the mentoring and the connections in the industry. Anything else we would be helpful to put together? And how much depth do you want at this first outreach?
say high level objectives and general interest areas to start out with. You don't have to send a complete, this is what I would do with my course, right? Just you're just expressing interest. I'm here. This is my expertise. This is my interest level. You're opening that conversation with whoever is managing the curriculum, right? So usually you're looking for the person who manages academic affairs. That's the good entry point. If you're not sure, send it to the dean. Our deans always pass off the resumes. And so those high level objectives, you don't necessarily need letters of recommendation at that point. We'll ask for references if we need it. And if you haven't taught before, that's okay. Again, you are reaching out and expressing your interests. And then, the academic deans are really great at thinking about is this somebody that we can get to the level that they can teach a particular type of course? And we'll get you ready, right? We spend a lot of time with our adjunct faculty in particular, helping you develop syllabi and helping to troubleshoot things that might come up in the classroom. It's really the academic dean that is that connection. I've also seen a question about classroom teaching versus clinical settings, and clinical legal education varies very much at different schools as well. Most clinics are taught by full-time faculty, but at some schools there are some client-based classes. So in a clinic, you are actually representing clients. Students are representing clients, right? And you are supervising them. And so that is really difficult to do as an adjunct, but sometimes there are ways to have more legal theory and practice types classes where perhaps there is something involving client work without a full-blown clinic. Clinical teaching, I would say, is actually harder to get started than doctrinal teaching, in my opinion, because there's a different time commitment in terms of the supervision that you need to provide to the students. It's not just you come, you teach your class, and you leave. You also have to do the supervision meetings and all of that. So for folks who have an interest in clinical teaching, especially if you're in Maryland area, I'm happy to follow up on that. But I would say that is a more difficult type of thing to do as an adjunct, but there may be opportunities. Sometimes there are adjuncts who are working with full-time faculty, for example, in a clinical setting as well, and that can be arranged. But again, it depends. But though, if that's an interest of yours, just put that in your cover letter when you're reaching out.
How can we help our audience here sort of understand what to expect after there's been that preliminary outreach, or to help manage those expectations? We've kind of led up to this already in terms of often there isn't a need, or there's a full-time faculty member already teaching it, or that course is already being offered and an adjunct is already in place, or the timing we talked about. But just how can we help manage those expectations for the audience as if they do submit materials and they reach the right person, or the materials reach the right person? What can they expect after that?
I guess here too, I might suggest just being really direct about the things that matter to you or any concerns that you have. I always try to be very transparent with people. And then again, we're a relatively small school, so there are courses that I want to offer that might be taught by adjuncts that I want to offer every year, but there may be a course that I only want to offer every other year, like every fourth semester. Or it may be that I'm rotating it with some other adjunct teaching a similar course I wanted every sixth semester. And so I certainly don't want to mislead anyone and have them thinking that this is going to be a regular, ongoing, long-term adjunct position. And so I try to be very transparent about that, but it's also helpful to understand from those who are interested what they're looking for or what they're okay with or not. And that, I think, that makes it a more productive collaboration.
Are there job postings for adjunct law positions, or is it this is the outreach and you're sort of going in and putting yourself out there, or are there actually postings that people could find online within their school, within your school's websites? Or
I'll just say, I'm going to have to drop off in a minute. I just wanted to say, we do have listings. We list everything on the websites, and we try to post them everywhere because I think again, it's one of these things where, we try not to just have this be friends recommending friends. So we try to put some transparency in the process. So do look for postings and, like I said, on the website, in the school website, and we try to post them in other places, sometimes Chronicle of Higher Education or other places, again, so that there's publicity around it. Sometimes we'll put them on our social media or things like that. So do keep a lookout. So I am gonna have to say goodbye, but thank you so much, all of you. I'll let you all finish up, and thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you, Allison. And as we're wrapping up, any final thoughts from the group about where to find these positions being posted? Additionally, folks that they could reach out to within the law school to make sure their materials are getting to the right person. Any other wrap-up tips as we conclude the program?
So I would say that the answer is that resounding, it depends. State schools have normally a job posting. As it happens, William and Mary doesn't have the job board on the law school website, is in the Central University's website, but any school/university will have an entire page dedicated to it. Ours is relatively vague because we have very many rules in terms of even just creating the posting. And so if we just create a posting for, say, trial advocacy, then we cannot use it for anything else. It's going to take 6 months to get it done. So the fact that it's vague, I don't want this to be a reason to put off potential candidates. Again, it's the reaching out to the academic, the person who's responsible for academic affairs that will help you navigate that process.
Any other wrap-up thoughts?
Yeah, I would say another resource for adjunct faculty is the American Association of Law Schools. So you can take a look at their website. I know they have great information about how to build a course, and they do an annual training session for adjunct faculty. And there's also, I see some questions in the chat about, well, how do I get into more full-time teaching? And as we said at the beginning, that's sort of a different type of process, right? It takes a lot of time to become a full-time tenure track law professor. So perhaps we do another session on that. But the American Association of Law Schools will post full-time visiting positions as well. So sometimes adjuncts are more, you have a full-time job and maybe you're just covering one class and maybe it continues, maybe you don't want it to continue. If you want more full-time, the American Association of Law Schools also has information about, well, how do I get into law teaching? And are there schools looking for more full-time visiting professors? And so that is kind of a different type of posting, a different type of entree into the market. So perhaps that is our next webinar.
Well, I think that's a great point for us to wrap up on. We got through many of the questions. I realize we may have missed a few with the time we had. So I do hope that our attendant audience will reach out and follow up with each of us with more questions that might be more personalized to your interest and your passion to teach. Michelle, Deborah, Ria, Sonali, Allison, as well as Carl, our wonderful AV specialist. I really appreciate all of your insights and for coming together today to share this with our community. As I mentioned at the outset, the recording will be shared with all of the registrants, as well as a moment to provide some feedback so that we can bring more programming like this. Again, this is just something that we're passionate about, and we just formed this little group to do it. So it's informal, but we appreciate your feedback and your participation. Let us know how we can continue to be a resource. We really want to enrich the pipeline of teaching at law schools. It's a fantastic and rewarding thing to do. So thank you all so much for being here today. And with that, we'll conclude the webinar and give you back your afternoon. Thank you so much.